The AAC Report is brought to you by Blake Blahut of Realty One Group. Whether you're looking to buy your very first home or looking to downsize or upgrade, call Blake Blahut anytime at 407-748-0484. Welcome to the AAC Report only on the Knightline Sports Network. I'm Jeff Allen. Thanks for listening. Coming up, we will continue our in-depth team-by-team focus in men's basketball. JP Gooderham of FearTheWave.com will be here to talk Tulane hoops. And Hayden Barber of the Wichita Eagle is standing by to give us an inside look at the Wichita State Shockers. But first, we will wrap up the final regular season football game in the AAC. Malcolm Perry rushed for 304 yards. Yes, you heard me. 304 yards and 2 touchdowns to lead Navy to a 31-7 rout over Army, breaking a 3-game losing streak to the Cadets. The 304 yards are the most by any player in the 120-game history of the Army-Navy game, pushing his season total to 1,804 yards, a new single-season rushing record at Navy, and it gives the midshipmen a 10-win season. Here's Malcolm Perry on his great day.
Just the O-line and the skill guys outside blocking their butts off. The coaches were calling some great plays, getting me in position to be successful, and the line was blocking it up good. So,
humble young man giving credit to his teammates, and he should have gotten an invite to the Heisman Trophy ceremony that took place later that night. Malcolm Perry had such a tremendous season, mostly under the radar nationally, and that's unfortunate because the numbers he put up were eye-popping. And congrats to Malcolm Perry on his great year and to Navy on their fine season. Temple defensive end Quincy Roche, the conference's 2019 Defensive Player of the Year, joins Memphis running back Kenneth Gainwell, the 2019 Rookie of the Year, on the Sporting News All-American team, while Temple center Matt Hennessy was chosen as a third-team All-America by the Associated Press. Roche was also a first-team selection by Sports Illustrated and was a second-team choice by USA Today. The bowl season gets underway Saturday. We've got some games coming up in the near future that involve AAC teams. The Cheribundi Boca Raton Bowl. That, of course, takes place in Del Boca Vista. SMU taking on Florida Atlantic Saturday, 3:30. That'll be on ABC. And on Monday, the Bad Boy Mowers Gasparilla Bowl, featuring UCF and Marshall. Again, that's Monday, 2:30 on ESPN. In men's hoops, a couple of nice out-of-conference wins over the weekend. Number 11, Memphis, they rolled into Knoxville and down then number 19 ranked Tennessee, 51-47, snapping the Vols' 31-game home winning streak. The Tigers rallied from 12 down to lift their season record to 8-1. Wichita State moves to 9-1. They downed Oklahoma 80-75. Eric Stephenson led the Shockers with 16, and we'll have more on the Shockers coming up later in the show. In volleyball, Cincinnati came within one frame of reaching the tournament's final 8 teams on Friday night. Number 11 Penn State rallied to stop the Bearcats in 5 sets. Cincinnati ends the season 27-7 as unanimous AAC Player of the Year Jordan Thompson closed her career with a match-high 30 digs. Tulsa saw its 2019 National Invitational Volleyball Championship run come to an end on Saturday night, dropping a 4-set decision out South Dakota. Tulsa became just the second team from the American to win 3 or more matches in a single postseason, joining last year's NIVC Finals Tulane. The Golden Hurricane was the final team of 5 representing the American still standing in a postseason tournament. American Defensive Player of the Year Taylor Horsfall, by the way, registered 29 digs in her final collegiate game to pace the Tulsa lineup. Cincinnati redshirt senior Jordan Thompson became the league's first American Volleyball Coaches Association first-team All-America choice. UCF sophomore McKenna Melville joined Thompson as an AVCA Honorable Mention All-America selection, that for the second straight season. And we continue our team-by-team capsules on men's basketball in the American. Joining us now to talk about the Tulane Green Wave, JP Gooderham of the FearTheWave.com and also the Fear the Wave podcast. JP, thanks for being back on with us.
Oh, of course. Thank you. I really appreciate you having us on to talk about where Tulane is in the world.
Yeah, and speaking of, in full disclosure, back when I had you on several months ago when Ron Hunter was hired as the new head coach away from Georgia State. We had you on the program then, and when we were recording the interview, I kept mixing up the fact that he did work for Turner Sports and kept calling him Ron Turner, but due to the magic of editing, nobody ever heard that. So this time around, I have a card that says Ron Hunter, so I will make sure that I stay on the straight and narrow there, and he has done a great job getting the Green Wave off to a good 8-2 start.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, if you look at for anyone kind of looking at Tulane, they were, I believe, a unanimous pick to be the worst team in the American this year. They were the worst team in the American last year. They went 4-27 under Mike Dunleavy in his final year. And on top of that, you had a huge wave of transfers, no pun intended, including Caleb Daniels, the star player of the team. He transfers to Villanova, really the lone bright spot, arguably, for Tulane's program that was still kind of coming out of the Dunleavy era. So you've got a team that was just really at the bottom of its worst. It was in the pit of despair. And on top of that, you have 9 newcomers this year. And if you fast forward to where we are talking on, I think, December 17th, Tulane is 8-2. Now, they've played, obviously, some, especially with a new coach, a new team. I won't, argue it's the strongest schedule in the world, but they have some nice wins. Like they have a neutral court win over Utah, who's been a pretty solid team this year, and I think that they've impressed a lot of folks relative to expectations.
So let's talk about this team a little bit and what they have out on the court. Tayshawn Hightower leading the way, 16.3 points a game. KJ Lawson, the transfer from Memphis, putting up 15 points a game. They've got some nice balance on the score sheet.
Yeah, and you really hit the nail on the head. The impact players, I mentioned before, 9 newcomers this year. Many of them were transfers, and they just it's really impressive looking at what Ron Hunter has done to build a team basically from scratch. It's almost like starting a college basketball program. And what he did, and he said this early on, was he was going to treat Tulane this year as a little bit of a last chance U. And he's brought all these guys, often from high major kind of programs, who, things were not going the right way wherever they were coming from. And he's built a really solid team. Tayshawn Hightower is a great example. He's a transfer from the University of Georgia. As you said, he's averaging over 16 points per game. KJ Lawson, I think, is probably going to be kind of your more household name. I believe he was a 4-star coming out of high school. Of course, he's been in the American before when he was at Memphis, before he transferred to Kansas. He's really done a nice job, I think, as being a high-efficiency player. And then another transfer that I would call out is Jordan Walker. We call him Jelly. And he's the point guard. And I think he's really, I think he's a guy who Coach Hunter expects a lot out of. And he's really working with him to run this offense and prevent turnovers and really build a system here under Coach Hunter in this first year, which has been exciting to see.
So why do they call him Jelly?
That's a great question. I'm actually not sure about that. He's a Seton Hall transfer. I know that was his nickname, but he's a really cool player to watch. I mean, he's had some really nice games. The Utah win that I mentioned was really his coming out party. But yeah, he's I'll just kind of mention this. He went to China this summer, not for a team event. He went over there and it was just like playing basketball on random playgrounds in China and posting the videos on Twitter. And it was just really, it was a cool thing to watch. And now, he sat out the last year. He actually was a Dunleavy recruit originally. He stuck it out. He stayed with Coach Hunter. And I think he's developing into a really nice player as well.
So aside from the players, what is the strength of the team strategically?
Well, I like the Ken Pomeroy stuff. One of the things is that Tulane is number 10 right now defensively in forcing turnovers. And I think that actually speaks to the fact that Tulane is doing some things that we didn't see from this team in the past few years, whether that's going to a full court press, playing with more aggression on defense. There's much more of a sense of urgency. And so I think those are things that have been strong. I think there's a number of guys. I think the other thing would be, as weird as it is to stay in a team that had so many transfers and basically as a whole new team, it does actually feel like there's like a good amount of depth to this team. We talked about a couple of these names. A lot of these games that Tulane's been in, you have 3 or 4 guys who are capable of putting up double digits and scoring. So it's not like if KJ comes out and has a bad night, the whole team necessarily shuts down. We kind of saw that last night with one of the weaker games of the season, which still was an 11-point win over Alcorn State. But I think the big thing that we're really interested in is Tulane plays a couple better teams to end non-conference, and moving into the AAC is, can you continue to get that level of production as you face better teams defensively with better talent? So that's a big question, I think, for the team to continue growing on.
And that was actually going to be my next question. How does this team shape up defensively?
Yeah, so I think that's, defense shows up, and I think that's a big part of what this team needs to do to be successful, especially once we hit the crux of the AAC schedule. And like I said, I think defensively it's a much, much improved team from last year, and that's something that a lot of Tulane fans, even if this, and again, they're 8-2 right now, but looking at the expectations of this was the worst team in the American, it could have been even worse this year, and it looks like they're, I'll kind of, go back to a little bit of the Ron Hunter magic. He gave this press conference. It was the big media day in New Orleans, right? And the media shows up, and somebody asked him, they're like, your team is expected to be the worst team in the American. What are you going to do? And he's like, I do not care. We'll walk across Lake Pontchartrain if we finish in last. We will not finish last. We will not finish last. And we're like, okay, man, we can't even believe in your team, but how are you going to pull that off? And I think a big part of it is just really defensively playing with a much better attitude. I think the guys he has on the floor, we have a number of guys who I think play pretty good defense. And I mentioned the turnover thing before. That's really been a big driver, even when the offense has hit some lulls and been a little more stagnant at times this year.
So what are the challenges for this team, and where would their weaknesses be?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think one of them is that there have been nights where they've been inconsistent shooting. And I think that's definitely something that the team is going to continue to show what it's capable of as we face this next stretch. They're going to be playing Akron, who's like a top 100 level team. And if they were to win that game, they would go play Liberty, who I think is still undefeated. And then, of course, you hit the AAC season where at the top you've got teams like Memphis and Wichita. So I think the big question for us is, can they continue to have productive, show a lot of production and really work a lot of different players into the game offensively as we hit those tougher stretches? And I think the second question is, and I know I just said this is the strength of the team, but does that level of play on defense continue to carry over? Really the only game this year that's been a clunker has been, they went and played St. Louis. I think they had, they were like 7-1 at the time. And St. Louis isn't a world beater, but they're a good, they're a solid team this year. And what happened in that game was really that St. Louis just could not miss threes. And so we haven't had a lot of data yet to figure out what are going to be the things that this team's going to struggle with the most. I think the big things for me are, can we see the defense really carry over? And number two, can they continue to get a lot of production from and show their depth as we start playing these better teams? That's my thinking.
Yeah, and I tell you what, when you talk about better teams, the American is full of them, and boy, conference play is not easy right out of the gate for Tulane. On the road at Memphis, at home against Cincinnati, a couple of big dogs right out of the chute.
Oh, for sure. It's going to be, and like I said, they're going to end with kind of their strongest part of the non-conference season. So I would say this period from really the end of December into early January is going to be a big test. And you're looking at those games. They're going to be an underdog in all of them. And I think the thing that we saw last year was just Tulane wasn't competitive, to be totally honest with you. There were only a handful of games where Tulane had any chance of winning when we look at conference play. If Coach Hunter is serious about this being better than a last-place team, and even more so, if this is a team that maybe could shock some people and finish toward the middle of the conference, then yes, those Memphis and Cincinnati games, if you can pull one off, that is obviously very awesome. But at minimum, you want to show that you're getting competitive with those teams. Then I think once you hit more of the kind of middle stretch of the conference, looking at teams like an SMU or a USF, obviously those are going to be challenges as well. But I think that where we want to see Tulane this year is that they can go ahead and win some of those games where last year, they won 0 games in conference. It was quite brutal.
Yeah. So what does Ron Hunter bring? What do the players see in him? What's the thing that drives them?
One of the things with Tulane basketball, which had a resurgence in the 1990s, they went to a couple of NCAA tournaments. Both times they won their first round. Other than that, historically, there hasn't been a model of what really works at Tulane. Now, in football, obviously, there have been tough periods, but there are a number of coaches who we've seen come to Tulane in football and succeed. Obviously, most recently, Willie Fritz, but before that, you had Tommy Bowden, who went undefeated and finished in the AP Top 10. You also had Mac Brown. There's something there. We kind of know what you can do at Tulane in football in reaching the top. Basketball is a much more wide-open thing. And I think what Ron Hunter brings the most of is that he is not afraid of that as a challenge, and I think that's a huge deal. Like, if you watch him speak, and honestly, I know you're speaking mostly to UCF fans, but for anyone who's a fan of the conference, like, Ron Hunter, when we play UCF, watch the interview after. The guy is, like, electric, and I think it's so exciting because he brings an energy to this program, and he's not going to accept. It's like the thing I said about finishing in last place, right? Most coaches who we would hire would be like, okay, obviously it's a tough thing. We're going to face some adversity. We're going to do the best we can. Ron Hunter's the kind of guy who steps up and is like, we are not going to let that happen. And I will put, my name and my brand and everything else on the line to make sure that's not the case. And if you look at his history, he's actually built 2 struggling programs already into teams that can make the NCAAs. The first being IUPUI, the second being Georgia State most recently, which is where he's, kind of most recognized from. Tulane and the AAC as a whole are a different level of challenge. I think the fact that he's willing to look that in the eye, and his goal is to build a team that doesn't just finish in the middle of the pack of the AAC, but can make a jump, we've seen UCF do that in recent years. That's something new for us, and I think that's something exciting that let him bring in a lot of talent from power conference programs, even though this was a model that no one really knew what it was going to look like.
Well, JP, as far as the conference goes, we mentioned Memphis already. Who else do you like in the conference as far as possibly making the NCAAs?
Wow. I think if I'm looking at who's going to win the conference, definitely Memphis is going to be the team that has stood out the most. I'm really interested in kind of that next grouping that we're going to see of what some of these teams can do, because I think as we go a little bit deeper into the league, we've seen a number of teams that are obviously kind of in a rebuilding stage, or at the very least haven't had a ton of consistency. I was pretty disappointed about the Houston loss to Oklahoma State. That was a couple of nights ago, and I was pretty surprised about that, to be honest with you, because I think that Houston program with some of the guys that they have, they have a lot of top-tier talent still on that team. I thought that was a team that definitely should be competitive to make it into the postseason. But I think that as I look at that, like number 2 and number 3 in the league, I think it's going to be interesting this year, and I think there's maybe more parity than we've seen in the past few years. That's been my impression, at least. And I hate to say it because I don't like to give them any positive, notes as they head out. But UConn's been a weird team too, because they have one of the worst losses that the AAC has had against St. Joseph's, which is like a bottom 75 team. But then obviously they have some nice wins as well, and so I'm very interested in who, as we kind of reach into conference play, can take that next step. And I think that there's a number of teams who are trying to fight those question marks off. What are you thinking? I mean, where's your head? Who, if you're looking at, like, who is like kind of your sleeper team of the AAC? Who do you think it is right now?
I think it's Wichita State. They've gotten off to an impressive start. Greg Marshall had them really hitting on strides towards the end of the last season, and they're looking good so far. Got the big win against Oklahoma the other night. I think they're definitely going to be a team to contend with.
Yeah, and I think if you look at the first net rankings came out, and I think it's like Memphis is at 16 and Wichita is at 18. I mean, those two teams seem to be ahead of the curve by a pretty significant margin, and Utah has not been like fully weaponized as a member of the AAC yet. And so seeing Greg Marshall, the Oklahoma win is a huge one for the conference, and I think for their program, kind of building back in that direction, I think is a really good thing, especially with us losing UConn as a basketball brand, whatever that's worth in the next year.
Well, JP, tell the folks where they can follow you and get the latest and greatest on Tulane sports.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you having us on as always. And again, I'm JP from Fear the Wave. You can check us out. The best place to do it is on Twitter, where we're at Fear the Wave blog. We have a newsletter on Substack. That's fearthewave.substack.com. But thank you very much for having us. We always appreciate the time.
And we mostly greatly appreciate you being on as well. JP Gooderham from Fear the Wave. Appreciate it. Up next, we look at Wichita State with Hayden Barber of the Wichita Eagle when the AAC Report continues in just a moment. Are you tired of the endless money pit of paying rent? Do you have a home you need to sell for top dollar? Talk to the Hometown Advantage award-winning real estate professional and fellow UCF Knight, Blake Blahut of Realty One Group. Blake has proven to produce results and a smooth process for his clients all across Central Florida. Whether you're looking to buy your very first home or looking to downsize or upgrade, talk to Blake Blahut. Visit him at his website, blakesorlandohomes.com, or contact him anytime at 407-748-0484. Again, blakesorlandohomes.com and 407-748-0484. Get the hometown advantage by working with Blake.
Every child in Central Florida deserves a toy at Christmas. But unfortunately, not every local family can provide that Christmas cheer. Hearts Helping Others of Central Florida is once again teaming with local businesses for their annual toy drive, and we need you. For years now, Hearts Helping Others of Central Florida has supported local Central Florida families in need with many programs, providing food, clothing, resources, and services. They do this regardless of the income bracket of the family, because every family could be just one paycheck away from financial disaster. During the holidays, things can be even worse for these families in need. For the next 2 weeks, you can drop off new unwrapped toys for ages newborn through 17 years old at one of our many drop-off locations. These include 5-Day Cabinets in Castleberry, O'Reilly Auto Parts in Apopka, Stefano's Restaurant in Winter Springs, Shovelhead Lounge in Longwood, and First Institute in College Park. The toy drive supports local families that may need a little help at this time of the year, and you, our Central Florida residents and local businesses, have a chance to provide the toys Hearts Helping Others will give away in its holiday support program this month. You can also donate financially through their website at heartshelpingotherscfl.com. Become a donor for the holidays or a monthly partner. Find us on Facebook or PayPal at heartshelpingothers7@gmail.com. Hearts Helping Others. We can't help everyone, but everyone can help someone.
And we have more team-by-team coverage of men's basketball in the American. Now we're going to focus on the Wichita State Shockers. Joining us now to do that is Hayden Barber, the Wichita Eagle. Hayden, thank you so much for being here.
Hey, absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Well, so far, the Shockers off to a 9-1 start, and they may be in the AAC, but they might be able to lay claim to the Big 12 after taking down Oklahoma State and Oklahoma this past Saturday night in consecutive games.
Yeah, no, it's been a pretty wild couple of weeks for WSU hoops, no doubt. A couple of weeks back, they played West Virginia out in Cancun, and it was not good for the Shockers. Of course, that's their only loss. Coach Greg Marshall afterward, really just kind of challenged his team, like basically just questioning, hey, are we tough enough? Since then, they've proven that, we definitely are. They out-rebounded Oklahoma State. They out-rebounded OU. They were clearly the more physical team in both those games. And from what I can tell, this is the first time that WSU has ever won back-to-back games against Big 12 teams, and they did it outside of their home arena. Now, I know the second one came just down the road at Intrust, another arena in Wichita, but to do it outside of their home floor, both those games, is pretty impressive.
So let's take a look back to last year first before we talk about this year's team. As Wichita State was the gold standard in the Missouri Valley Conference for so many years. They take the step up in weight class to the American, and they start off slowly, but as conference play went on, they really kind of got on a nice roll as the year went on, and that culminated in an NIT Final Four. So with that first year under the belt in the American, what was your take on that?
Yeah, so, I had a unique perspective last year because I was actually a full-time high school reporter last year at this time. And so I kind of watched the Shockers from afar. And from the first half of the season, no one really knew what this team was going to be, right? Like, no one knew that they would hit that role. No one knew that they were going to, make it to the NIT Final Four, do any of the things that they did. Because golly, you go back to just even the first exhibition game, they played Catawba, and they ended up winning that game, but it was close, and I can't tell you for the life of me where Catawba is, and so now you look ahead to what they're doing this year, and they've really just carried on that momentum, and that's truly impressive. And they've talked a lot about just how embarrassing last year was, especially early in the season, how that's really spurred what we're seeing now.
Yeah, they probably knew they were going to struggle a little bit because they had so many new pieces that they had to work with. And I think it also shows that, Greg Marshall can coach a little bit too. Can you talk about, what he means to Wichita?
Oh, man. Yeah, that's I actually went to Oklahoma State, and if you know anything about Oklahoma State, it's Mike Gundy town. And that's basically how it is at WSU, right, with Greg Marshall. He's kind of the guy that brings in all the ticket sales, and that's through everything that Wichita State hoops has been through. The Final Four appearance a couple years back and everything. He's the one constant, right? So he's the guy that people can always refer back to and say, Wichita, Greg Marshall. It's like that. Everybody knows that. He's had so many opportunities, I'm sure, to go elsewhere, bigger and better jobs, and he's stuck in Wichita. So I think the fans and the whole city really has really gotten behind him, and he's definitely a huge piece to the identity of the city.
So if you can kind of go into it a little bit as far as, how they're playing, let's talk a little bit about them offensively. Eric Stephenson averaging just over 13 points a game. Tyson Etienne is at 11 points a game, and a lot of balance. They've got three other guys to just over a shade of 9 points a game. This seems to be a very well-balanced team.
Yeah, and I was thinking about it after that OU game. I feel like Marshall's biggest challenge this year is going to be finding the hot hand as early as possible. At the Oklahoma State game, it was the Etienne show. Golly, the kid just went off, and after the game, he was the source of all the questions. And then after the OU game, it was Sherfield. It was Grant Sherfield, another freshman. And Marshall didn't implement him into the game plan and into the flow of the game until, I think it was with about 11 minutes left in the second half. They were down 8. And then finally, Sherfield starts getting to the paint, turning defenders' heads, and he's able to make plays like that. I will say the one constant throughout all of this has been Eric Stephenson. The way he's elevated his game this year. Like I said, watching from afar last year, I don't think anyone could have been too impressed. And what he's doing now is pretty eye-opening, no doubt. And then you look across the board, you got other guys like Trey Wade, Echenike and Poor Bear. These guys that really just grind out buckets. But again, it comes down to who's going to have the hot hand that day. At the Oklahoma State game, Demarius Burton had, I think, a career high 13 assists, which was outrageous. And then, you go to the OU game and he's almost non-existent. So it's just a matter of, and I know that kind of goes hand in hand with just about every coach in the country, but with this team being so young and so new, I feel like it's critical that Marshall, gets a hold of who's got the hot hand that day.
Yeah, and and they're doing all this with sight. One of their best shooters, Dexter Dennis, is struggling from 3-point range, so they're able to overcome that with all the balance they have. Yeah,
and it's Dex went through this a little bit last year as well. He definitely turned a lot of heads last year, and there was already starting to have talk in town about, man, is this next Fred VanVleet? Is this next Ron Baker? Is this guy, headed to the NBA? Is he going to stick around in Wichita? Is he Landry Shamet maybe? Now what you're seeing now, it's like you almost start to wonder, like, did we have any impact on that? Like, did we kind of jinx him there? He will work through this. He's a good enough athlete, a good enough player to work through it. It's definitely a big deal when he's hitting a shot right now. I can tell you that. He hit a 3 against OU that sent the arena into fire. So it's been a grind for him, no doubt. But once he gets rolling, that's definitely another huge piece that they can add to the arsenal.
So offensively, what do you think is the best thing that they do well?
So I think the thing that they excel at the best is driving to the paint and kicking it out. They've got so many guys that can do both of those things, and they do have a few guys who are better, at each individual piece. But man, you look at a guy like Eric Stephenson who can do both. Get to the paint, finish with both hands, but also has the ability to kick it out to guys like ATN and Dexter and Sherfield and just so many other guys. It feels like who can knock down shots. Coach Marshall said after the OU game that getting into the paint was really the thing that turned the tide in that game. And looking back on it, watching tape on it, it definitely was. They talked about finding the back of defenders' heads once guys got into the paint. Finding the empty space behind the 3-point line, and just so many buckets this season. So they've been so efficient off the drive and kick that I think that's definitely got to be their bread and butter for me, at least right now.
Yeah, and I think the other hallmark of good teams is they're low on turnovers, and conversely on the defensive side of the ball, they're averaging 7 steals a game.
Right. Yeah, and it's they've had this thing for years at Wichita State called play angry, and this goes back decades, definitely before even Greg Marshall. So play angry is exactly how it sounds, right? They want to kind of be nasty on defense, and last year they missed that. They did not have it, and maybe that was because they were just so young. But this year you can tell. I think they took all that personal. They definitely did, and Stephenson even said as much after the OU game, saying, they lost 32 points to OU last year, and he said that was super personal. And so I think they are taking everything that was handed their way last year and really making the most of it, especially on the defensive end.
Well, they have a couple more non-conference games, and then they dig into the American schedule as far as the conference play is concerned. So, what are you looking at as far as conference play goes? Memphis is certainly a favorite of everybody to win the conference, but I have Wichita State as being my dark horse that they could definitely contend.
Yeah, I think at this point in the season, it would be hard to keep them out of that number 2 or maybe number 3 spot. Everybody's going to have Memphis on top. As soon as Wiseman gets back, it's going to be a whole different ball game. But I think it's important for Wichita State to take an early lead at least, and kind of try to hold on to it. It definitely gets tougher as the year goes on. Set aside the Memphis game to start. But man, it feels like they just. I'm not sure how to exactly word it. Maybe it just kind of goes back to that whole idea of they take this so much more personally than it seems other teams do. They play with so much more, I guess, just anger maybe than it seems other teams do. When you look at loose balls on the floor or second chance points or points in the paint, they are always leading in those departments, especially lately. So, dark horse, I wouldn't count them out.
Yeah, and I would also think too, they now have gone through a run through the American Conference, which they knew that this was going to be a different deal than the MVC, and there's a lot of good teams in this conference, and this could be another 4-bid tournament league again this year, maybe even 5.
Right. Yeah, and that was one thing that was really intriguing throughout the year last year, as Wichita State was, kind of on the bubble. Maybe not so much as people in Wichita would have liked to have believed, but it was something that definitely people in town paid attention to, is how many teams from from the league were getting in. Moving up to the AAC out of the Missouri Valley, that was a huge deal as far as your automatic bids and everything like that. So, I think the thing that Wichita State has to avoid is just looking over teams. They can't get too ahead of themselves, right? I mean, this is a team that still went to the NIT last year. So for them to think that they can walk in on a Saturday afternoon and beat Tulane by 30, I don't know. I think that's a little far fetched. If they can avoid, I guess quote unquote trap games like that, they'll be in good shape.
Well, Hayden, let the folks know where they can follow you for coverage of Wichita State basketball.
Well, if you so choose, you can follow me on Twitter at HK_Barber. I've got a partner in crime as well, Taylor Eldridge. I believe his handle is T Eldridge, and he does a great job as well. So that's where you can find us.
All right, that's Hayden Barber of the Wichita Eagle, giving us the lowdown on Shockers basketball for this season. We thank you again for taking the time.
Hey, no doubt. Appreciate you having me.
And looking at our honors for men's basketball, player of the week is Eric Stephenson of Wichita State. 16.7 rebounds, 2 blocks, and a steal as the Shockers downed Oklahoma 80-75. He was 4-7 from three-point range in leading the Wichita State to their third consecutive win. The freshman of the week, Caleb Mills of Houston, 20-point average and 2.5 rebounds per game as the Cougars went 1-1 last week, scoring 23 against Oklahoma State on Sunday after a 17-point effort in a win over UT Arlington a week ago. And honors for women's basketball, player of the week is Jonesha Cash of SMU. Had a career outing in their 66-51 win over North Dakota on last Monday. Career highs in points, 18. Career high in rebounds, 16. And added 4 blocks in just 27 minutes on the floor. And the freshman of the week, Asona Alexander of Temple, was their leading scorer and rebounder in the Owls' 74-69 Big 5 win over Villanova a week ago. And as always, a couple of reminders before we close shop on this week's program. As always, I invite you to follow me on Twitter. My handle is @JeffAllen_88. Please give me a follow, and I'll be happy to follow you back. And we'll have continuing coverage on the Knightline Sports Network for the Gasparilla Bowl as UCF takes on Marshall, so make sure you keep refreshing the feed for the latest on that. And that will do it for this week's AAC Report, only on the Knightline Sports Network. I'll be taking next week off, so I extend to you best wishes for a joyous holiday season. I'm Jeff Allen. Thanks for listening, and happy holidays.